Good afternoon, and welcome to the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy's live weekly broadcast. I'm Roberta Oscar, the Communications Director. Our program brings you news and analysis about economic, racial, social, and environmental justice issues here in Virginia. We bring the expertise and perspective of legislators, community members, policy experts, and faith leaders. We keep you informed, and we keep our elected officials accountable. In keeping with the mission of the Virginia Interfaith Center, we will share resources and offer opportunities for you to get involved in our work, advancing social justice and helping our neighbors. And this broadcast is interactive, so please engage and ask questions live on the show on our Facebook feed. We care what you think. We would love to hear from you. And now to today's broadcast. Our focus is the priorities of Virginia's Legislative Black Caucus. And I am thrilled to introduce three special guests who are all caucus members. Delegate Lamont Bagby. He's the chairman of the caucus, a Democrat representing the 74th District. Welcome, Delegate Bagby.
Thank you for having us.
And our second guest is Delegate Jennifer Carroll Foy, a Democrat who represents the 2nd District. Welcome, Delegate Carroll Foy.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
And Senator Jennifer McClellan, a Democrat representing the 9th District. And before we get started, I want to let you know Delegate Bagby has a meeting at 11:30, so he will be leaving the broadcast early, but we're hoping our other guests can stay on for a few more minutes. Our moderator is my colleague and friend, Benjamin Hoyne, the Policy and Campaigns Director for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. I'll turn it over now to Ben.
Thank you, Roberta, and once again, thank you to all of our guests for joining us today. And we're going to talk about the priorities for the Virginia's Legislative Black Caucus. So I want to start with the chairman of the caucus, Delegate Bagby. You often state that the Legislative Black Caucus has no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, only permanent issues. What are some of your hopes for the upcoming session in regards to those longstanding issues of the Legislative Black Caucus? Delegate Bagby. Delegate Bagby, are you able to hear us? Sounds like we're having some technical difficulties. Maybe I'll turn that over to Senator McClellan as the vice chair of the caucus. If you want to take that question, what are some of the hopes of the Legislative Black Caucus for the upcoming special session?
No.
Well, thank you for that. We announced our agenda, I guess it was about a month ago, where we want to address some long-standing issues we've been addressing, dealing with racial inequity, everything from declaring racism a public health crisis to dealing with criminal justice reform and police reform. We are also dealing with some of the COVID-related issues around the evictions moratorium that's going to lift soon, and the utility disconnect moratorium for non-payment, how we make sure that when those moratoriums end, that the customers who couldn't pay their bills and probably are still facing financial struggles now that the unemployment has run out from the federal government, making sure that they don't get put out or disconnected in the middle of a pandemic. So creating a glide path to make them whole. Those would be the big issues that we face. And obviously the budget, we will deal with the governor's budget amendments that he will present the morning of the 18th, but we've made clear our priorities are our K-12 education system, our HBCUs, and making sure that we are providing PE, overtime pay, hazard pay to some of our essential workers, many of whom are people of color. So those are the broad issues that we will focused on this session.
Great, thanks. And to follow up on one of those, I know housing and tenants' rights is an issue that you focus on this past General Assembly, and certainly is a critical issue facing folks during this pandemic. How do you expect the Senate or the Legislative Black Caucus to kind of stop some of these evictions and deal with this eviction pandemic that we're dealing with today?
So the first step, the first step is making sure that we are providing rent relief using not just CARES Act money, but if we can find additional funding, and again, we'll see the amount that the governor reduces when he puts in, but we want to make sure that we are providing, it's just going to be money to help these individuals pay their rent. Because a lot of the landlords, they also have expenses. And so we want to make sure that you're not just kicking the can down the road and having a big bill due. We're looking at a couple of other issues, like perhaps extending the lease payments, putting the money that hasn't been paid so much at the end of the lease term so you can stretch out when you pay it. But what we've also seen is a lot of renters who are now living in hotels but don't have the same protections that they would if they were living in an apartment. So we will have a bill to extend renter protections to individuals living in hotels long term because they deserve those same protections. So a couple of ways that we're going to deal with that, and then tying an evictions moratorium to landlords providing some relief. So that if maybe waiving a month of the rent, but making sure we're stretching out when payments would have to be paid, because a balloon payment of 4 or 5 months up front is just not possible for anybody. And so stretching that out, having payment plans in place so that we can stretch out that money.
Great, thanks. Sticking with kind of COVID relief and immediate relief, Delegate Carroll Foy wanted to ask you, you've long been a proponent of paid family and medical leave. I know paid sick leave has also been on the priority for the Legislative Black Caucus. I just saw it come out on the House Democratic priority list as well. How do you propose going forward on providing paid sick leave so that at a minimum people in this pandemic can quarantine safely, whether from their family, from work, from their coworkers? How can we solve some of this paid sick leave conundrum we're in?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I have been championing paid family medical leave for a very long time. As you know, a new mom, I gave birth to my premature twins months early and had to be hauled back to work right after giving birth because we don't have paid family medical leave here in Virginia. So it's a serious issue. And now it's been exacerbated by the fact we have this pandemic that we're dealing with. So if we're saying that essential workers are that, if we're saying that they are heroes and they need to have the pay and the job protections in order to reflect it. And so part of that is paid family medical leave and paid sick days. Now, paid family medical leave, we would have to make upfront investments in order to jumpstart that program. It would allow for people to get to up to 80% of their pay for several weeks. And it's something that isn't afforded to everyone, and it should be. So people could take the time out to care for themselves or loved ones. If they're sick, they contract COVID-19, et cetera. Something that is more likely to pass during a special session is paid sick days. And I believe that's being carried by Senator Favola and Delegate Guzman. And so paid sick days is an important element to this in order to help prop up the most vulnerable Virginians and give some of our most marginalized communities the assistance and help that they need in order to receive pay while they're sick, especially if they've contracted COVID-19. Many times they have to leave work for up to 14 days. They have to be tested multiple times negative before they can return. And I don't know how many of us can go weeks at a time with no paycheck. And so that's something that we can implement. I think it has a really good chance of passing this special session. One of the things that Chairman Torring said that we can allot new and discretionary funding for is COVID-related issues. And I think that's something that will help many Virginians. That's something that's very practical and pragmatic that we can get done, and it's long overdue.
Great, thank you. A final question that I was hoping to ask Delegate Bagby as he carried the percentage income payment program related to utility bills this past legislative session, although Senator McClellan, that got rolled into your broad Virginia Clean Economy Act bill that was really more of an environmental bill. But for us at the Interfaith Center and others focused on low-income Virginians, the energy burden is really an important piece. So I know we actually had Delegate LaSharice Aird on our show last week as she was discussing the water cutoffs that are situation in Petersburg, and she mentioned she'll be introducing a bill on a moratorium for water cutoffs. I know the Fair Energy Bills Act that passed 77-23 in the House this past session, but didn't get a floor vote, would attempt to claw back some of that $2 billion in over earnings from Dominion. That would go a long way to paying down all of the debt, frankly, for residential customers in Dominion's territory on electricity bills. How do you envision the Legislative Black Caucus prioritizing stopping the water cutoffs and the electricity cutoffs for folks that are in the midst of this pandemic?
So Delegate Aird and I are actually working with the Poverty Law Center on a bill just on that very point to deal with the State Corporation Commission has extended the moratorium on disconnections for water, electricity, and gas through August 31st to give us time at the General Assembly to craft a longer term solution. Short term, we are looking at a bill that would require for payment plans that, because again, once that moratorium lifts, you're going to have about 5 months worth of bills due at once, and very few people are going to be able to pay that, if anybody. So we would provide a payment plan that could be up to 24 months. That would have the monthly payments be tied to a certain percentage of income so that you wouldn't have anyone paying, and the bill's not completely drafted, so I'm going completely on memory. I think it's about 4 or 5% of a monthly income. A monthly payment under that payment plan wouldn't be more than 4 or 5% of the individual's monthly income. And there are a couple of other parameters that would be around that payment plan, really to make sure, once again, you're spreading those payments out rather than having this gigantic balloon payment that can't be paid up front. And then we'll look for some more long-term solutions going forward through session on how to prevent something similar from happening in the future.
Great. Wanted to turn to criminal justice reform. Delegate Carroll Foy, this past session, you actually, along with Senator McClellan, had a bill for cash bail data collection that unfortunately did not have the monetary wherewithal to get passed. As we attempt to reform the criminal justice system, including the cash bail system, what are some ways, Delegate Carroll Foy, that you see as that Virginia can reform its justice system?
Yes, so thank you for that. As the first public defender ever elected to the General Assembly, I deal with this issue on a daily basis. My clients are the poor, people who are over 100% below the poverty line. My clients are people who suffer from mental illness, substance abuse, and children who have been neglected, abused, and oftentimes everything has failed them. Their families have failed them, the systems have failed them, the schools have failed them. And then that's where I step in, as sometimes their only champion and that brick wall there to protect them from everything else. And so I have an intimate perspective about what we need to reform our criminal justice system, because let's be clear, we have a two-tier criminal justice system here in Virginia, one for the haves and one for the have-nots. One that works one way for Black, Brown, and other marginalized communities, and one that works well for everyone else. And so one of the biggest ways that we can end mass incarceration here in Virginia, where Black people are 19% of the population, but over 51% of the prison population, is by reforming our cash bail system, where that has significantly increased the amount of people being detained pre-trial, meaning they have not been found guilty of a crime, but because they are too poor to pay for their freedom, they sit in jail for weeks and months at a time. And those are my clients. And so fighting for this cash bail bill for the last several years, I helped draft with ACLU, Legal Aid, Justice Forward, and a lot of other justice groups. It's really twofold. That bill is not only a data collection bill, but it's also a bill to make the presumption of release and put that to the forefront. Because it should be, the burden should be on the Commonwealth to prove that a person is a danger to themselves, the community, or a flight risk. And until and unless that's proven, people should be able to be released. And so that's one of the most profound things that we can do. And then once we have the information from the cash bail data collection, we can make evidence-based decisions about what needs to happen next in order to have true reform. Other things that we can do is what we recently done here in Prince William County. I put in a bill along with State Senator Scott Serval to have a public defender's office in Prince William County, so people can get competent and complete representation, because you have sentencing advocates and you have all of these people who will work to get veterans connected with services, and people who receive SSI to get that reinstated once they're released, so they can actually pay their court fines and fees. So those are the things that I think will really help. Also, having bills such as or initiatives such as the one that we have now, which is representation. I'm excited to have championed an effort to diversify the bench, mainly here in Northern Virginia, but that needs to be exercised throughout the Commonwealth, period, because we need people to have cultural competence. We need representation on the bench for people who are making life and death decisions about people's future. And it was in 2016, I believe, a study was done, and there were only 5 minorities in all of Northern Virginia sitting on the bench. And last year alone, I helped appoint 5 in one session, helped put the first Latino on the bench in Prince William County, the first African-American ever on the bench in Loudoun. And that's what it means to really do the work, because that's what reform means. It means reforming the system from the inside out. And so once you have people who execute the laws, interpret the laws, who understands people everyday struggle, well, that means something. Because I'm tired of trying to convince judges that my client is too poor to pay $50. If you don't have the life experiences to understand that my client just ate out the trash on his way to court today, then you can understand why he can't pay, and then maybe he should just be released and be forced to come back on his court date. So those are the type of practical things that's done. I'm also championing, and it's a Black Caucus agenda to legalize marijuana, because according to the 2017 Virginia Crime Commission study, African Americans are 3 times more likely to be stopped, charged, and convicted for simple possession of marijuana for personal use, even though we have almost the exact same usage rates and possession rates as our white counterparts. So that's what fairness, equality, and justice really means. And those are just some of the ways that we reform our criminal justice system.
Great, thank you. Senator McClellan, I know you've long worked on criminal justice reform as well. This past General Assembly, you were able to eliminate mandatory minimums for driving with a suspended license. Finally, after years of struggle, getting the Fishback bill passed, and we're huge fans of Lily Branch Kennedy at the Interfaith Center. So from the Senate side, what are some ways that you view that Virginia can reform its criminal justice system?
So a lot of I'll echo a lot of what Delegate Carroll Foy mentioned, but there are about 4 or 5 other areas that we've announced our packages on. Again, the bills hopefully will be dropped, if not today or tomorrow, early Monday. First, we need to provide accountability, transparency for police misconduct. So we will have a civilian review board bill that will authorize localities to have civilian review boards that have teeth, that have investigatory power, subpoena power, can make binding recommendations with an appeals process, but that everything they do is independent and transparent. We will have legislation creating a Marcus alert named after Marcus David Peters, who was killed here in Richmond by a police officer when he was in the middle of a mental health crisis. because too often law enforcement is the first responder when a mental health professional should be the first responder. So the idea behind the Marcus Alert is to create a mobile crisis unit where you would have a mental health professional arriving on the scene with police securing the scene, but the mental health professional securing and helping the individual come out of crisis. Police reform, Senator Mamie Locke unveiled last week a comprehensive police reform bill that includes banning no-knock warrants, chokeholds, et cetera, and prohibiting use of force and sort of lethal force as the first resort. Pretty broad bill. We also are focusing on giving prosecutors back the ability to be merciful. So reducing some of the mandatory minimum sentences that we have, giving prosecutors more authority to do deferred disposition. Those are just a few things, you know, providing more ability to do compassionate release. I know Don Scott has a bill making it easier to get good time credit. We probably will have a version of that on the Senate side that we're trying to finalize as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting something because we rolled about a 5 or 6 point package. We actually have a press conference tomorrow where we will provide more detail on those as the bill drafts come back. So stay tuned there. And then finally, we have made progress, some progress dealing with the school to prison pipeline, but not enough. And this year we were able to pass 2 bills that I actually introduced in 2012, along with a third that in 2012 passed that required schools to report discipline data by race, ethnicity, and other demographic measures that proved what we knew then, but now we have the data to back up that it is students of color, students with disabilities, and especially the intersection of the two who are disproportionately suspended, expelled, and also referred to law enforcement. What didn't pass then, but did pass this year, was getting rid of disorderly conduct charges for students, which was literally used to charge kids with misdemeanors for things like singing a rap song on a bus or kicking a trash can. We got rid of that this year. We also restored discretion to principals to decide if there are incidents or behaviors that technically constitute a crime, but should really be handled through the discipline process. It could be as simple as, you know, you bring a butter knife to school, or you pat somebody on the back, or even if there's a fight but there's no injury, give the principal the ability to decide, is that something I can handle through the discipline process, but reporting to the parents what happened and they can decide what to do. Under the law, they had to report it no matter the circumstances. So we made some progress there, but we still haven't restored mental health professionals in the school building who can deal with behaviors that more often than not are the manifestation of either an intellectual or developmental disability or a mental health issue. 1 in 5 kids has either ADHD, autism, anxiety, trauma that begins to manifest as early as 3 through behavior. And rather than looking at what caused this kid to act out, maybe it's an underlying issue that a counselor or a psychologist or a social worker could deal with. More often than not, they're referred to SROs or law enforcement. And so I think there's going to be some efforts dealing with the state SRO grant program to shift those resources back to counselors because they really should be doing those jobs and not SROs.
I appreciate you bringing up the school to prison pipeline. Certainly a critical issue, and congratulate you on working on it all these years. And I think you and Delegate Bourne were successful in getting some of the bills passed this year, which was wonderful. Yeah. I want to welcome Delegate Bagby back. Hope you can hear us. Wonderful.
I can.
One of the top line priority on the Legislative Black Caucus press release from a month or so ago was to address and combat racism. I know you oversaw a process to repeal inequities in Virginia's code. So seems like you would have some expertise in this area. What are some ways that the Commonwealth can continue to address and combat racism, whether it's through the code, through schools, through police reform, all the above?
Well, you giving me a golden opportunity to talk about a lot of things, but first I want to just say how awesome it is on a day such as this to be sharing the stage with two black women lawyers. This is a time that we celebrate them, and so it is awesome to share the stage with them this morning. But there's a lot of opportunities, as we talked about in our press release, and we talk about quite frequently in every corner of the Commonwealth and in every segment of our society. We have to address the challenges associated with systematic racism and how that infiltrates into our school system, how that infiltrates into our healthcare, how that infiltrates into our judicial system. And so we have been charged with a number of I believe, obligations as relates to the Black Caucus to be the voice of those individuals, black and white, and any individual that is that has been has experienced challenges because of who they are. And so I am so pleased that we were able to accomplish so much. And I often talk about this because I think about those individuals that came before us. The Bobby Scotts, the Doug Wilders, the Gerald Jones, the Louise Lucas, who's still here doing the work with us. The list goes on of those individuals that have really laid the groundwork for us. I don't want to talk too long, but I do want to. Gerald Jones, big Gerald Jones, not baby Gerald Jones, but big Gerald Jones sent me a text the other day, just showing me how the Black Caucus stuck together in the 90s to fight against abolishing parole. And so they are looking, those that are here still with us, and I believe those that are up in heaven are still looking at us with a great sense of pride. And so it's very refreshing that we had an opportunity this past session to deliver on so many goals and objectives that the VLBC has been promising to stay focused on. We delivered on those promises this past session. But as we walked out of the chamber in March, we all agreed that it was one space that we did not make nearly as much progress as we wish we would have. And that was in the area of justice. And so we were fully committed even before the challenges associated with COVID and Mr. Floyd, that we were going to make sure that we were able to get some of this, these justice reform. I often try to not say criminal justice reform because a lot of it is not dealing with criminals. It's dealing with individuals that are disenfranchised and run through the criminal justice system. But we were focused on dealing with justice reform, and that's why I'm proud to share the stage with these two leaders, because they've been focused on it, and I know that if we continue to work on these agenda items, we will get all that we have on our agenda accomplished, either in the special session or in the 2021 session. And it all comes down to educating individuals of the impact of the decisions that we make in the General Assembly. And I think when we do that, and we have the people pushing us and at our backs, supporting us, we will accomplish those goals that are laid out in our legislative agenda, and we will build upon that, because one of the things that we also realize is we don't have all the answers. And so we've been making sure that we make time to talk, but we also take time to listen. And so we have had a number of town halls as a caucus, as a House caucus, as a Senate caucus, and as the Black caucus, and as individual caucuses. And so I'm so proud of where we are, but we really have an opportunity to address a number of issues, and we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And I won't be doing it in heels, but these ladies will. And so I'm excited about where we are.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I know that that you all are busy and likely out of time. So
well, I had
really,
technical difficulties, so I want to stay on a little bit longer.
You want to say, oh, all right. Can't turn down the chairman. Well, then let me turn it over to Delegate Carroll Foy to kind of address the same question. What are some ways that you see from your perch that Virginia can address and combat racism?
So that is an all-encompassing question. And so there's different ways to combat racism. But one of the things that I want to be very clear about is that if we're going to do it, then we have to do it. So while I understand there's a huge focus on statues and monuments, and while symbolism is important, right? Like our Constitution and our flag and the Statue of Liberty, these things are important. So is passing substantive legislation. And so if we're really going to combat racism, what that looks like is addressing the historical and systemic inequities in our healthcare, education, in our economy, and that in our environment. And those are the things that really matter. And so while I always support peacefully protesting with a purpose, there has to be something that comes out of that, or it's a moment lost. And so I always like to say that my protest is through passing policies. And so I'm going to continue to work diligently with my brothers and sisters in the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and the Democratic Caucus, and even on the other side of the aisle where we can, in order to make inroads to address these issues. And so some of the most poignant things we can do immediately is, for example, we can end qualified immunity for the bad actors of police officers who are violating people's constitutional rights with impunity. We can expand police decertification criteria by ensuring that officers who do violate the law or do violate people's constitutional rights, they can not then go to another jurisdiction and then work there. So that's one of the problems that we have here in the Commonwealth. After speaking with police chiefs, they've communicated that that's a situation. They can name names of officers who should not be working. However, because of the inefficiency of our decertification process, these officers were able to just move over to another jurisdictions and continue the same type of behavior, and that's unacceptable. Expanding the use of body cams. I was excited that Chairman Torian from the Legislative Black Caucus, we passed one of his initiatives to collect data. Whenever an officer pulls people over, they have to now collect demographic data of everyone, so we can see who's being pulled over, why the stop is happening, and the result. So that's important information, again, so we can make evidence-based decisions about how we're going to move forward. Banning the use of chokeholds and excessive force, so we can prevent the unlawful death of people due to racial injustice and due to people violating people's constitutional rights. So once we have these things in place, they can act as barriers. But it's not only about accountability, it's also about prevention. And so we can do things such as on the application, when officers fill out applications to be hired, they don't have to disclose whether or not they're affiliated with any race-based hate group. That might be something we want to know. And also not just have implicit bias training, but bias training. And so you have to really get to the root cause of stereotypes and the criminalization and demonization of Black and brown skin, and how people can react in unwarranted ways because of that. And so that has to be directly addressed. And so those are just some of the things that we can do, along with fully funding our schools, giving teachers the pay increases that they deserve, addressing environmental injustice, where Black and brown communities and Black and brown men and women are more likely to live close to landfills and power plants and coal ash ponds that seep lead, arsenic, and mercury into our water, and how that has unjust results, such as Black women having a higher mortality rate given birth, because of the way I appear in the world, that is a risk factor, making me 3 times more likely to die during childbirth. That is racism at its best, and it has to be taken on head first. And so supporting bills like the bill that I carried along and Delegate aired to address the Black mortality rate and to reduce that. I mean, these are the things that have to be done. You have to do the work. And doing the work looks like passing solid policies that the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus has made its top agenda items, along with the Democratic Caucus on both sides, to say this will be handled. We hear you, we see you, and we will get something done.
Thanks. Senator McClellan, same question to you.
So I think 100% agree with everything that's already been said. I think it's important to understand and underscore that it's systemic. Racism is systemic, and it goes back to how this country and how this Commonwealth was first formed. And I think part of it, because part of your question is not just is globally, what can we do? We need to have an honest conversation about our history. We need to have it taught, the complete story, in our schools. And we need to make sure as part of public history, we are telling the complete story. We have to understand that this country was founded as part of a business venture where the land and natural resources was taken and exploited from indigenous people. And then a government was created by those white land-owning men. And then the first Africans came and were used to serve those men as labor for free. And then the first women came to serve those men as wives with no rights. That's the first step, is let's have an honest conversation about that. Let's include in our school curriculum the complete story of our history of what happened after the Civil War, when there was a rise in economic, social, and political power of African-American men. And then there was a swift backlash against it that resulted in a constitution that disenfranchised Black people, that we're still trying to eliminate the vestiges of that had racial terror and the rise of monuments as a backlash to the rise of that power. We have to, that's not taught in schools. That's not talked about in our communities. We have to talk about that. We have to make sure our curriculum is accurate. We have to make sure that the curriculum in medical school that taught, healthcare professionals that Blacks had a higher threshold for pain. We got to talk about that and make sure that's not still being taught. So it starts with education, and there are policies that we need to address in housing to deal with centuries of redlining, in transportation, in land use policy. You name the issue, you name the system. There were policies put in place centuries or decades ago that need to be addressed and unraveled. But part of your question is, what can we do? Every single person and organization needs to ask themselves some really hard questions. What am I doing as an individual or as an organization every day to either eradicate systemic racism, maintain the status quo, or make it worse? Because yes, there are people who intentionally maintain the status quo or make it worse, but there are a lot of people who do it unintentionally because they don't understand how our past still impacts our present. And that's not an easy conversation to have for individuals or organizations, but we can't fix this with just policy and legislation. If we could, we'd be in a different place right now. We need to change hearts and minds, and that starts with the individual taking a really hard look at themselves and asking those really tough questions. And it's particularly important for our communities and our organizations, be they nonprofit, the private sector, or government, to do that same thing, do that very same soul searching, and then be honest about what you find, and then take steps to correct it.
That's so true. Thank you, Senator McClellan. Delegate Bagby, as the chairperson of the caucus, I don't envy having to follow these tremendous women, but I will leave you with the last word. And what can the Interfaith Center do to answer or not answer, but to piggyback on Senator McClellan's question? What can the folks watching right now do, whether it's next week during the special session in January, for the regular session, or in the streets, or in the in the school or anywhere else. I'll leave you with the last word.
Thank you. And I would say that again, I would go back to our eyes and ears are open. We are here to listen and find out what it is that we can do to make sure that the people of the Commonwealth, everybody has an equitable opportunity moving forward. I know that sounds cliche. I know it sounds like something that you hear quite frequently, but as you can see by our actions, particularly in the last few years, when given the opportunity, we are going to deliver on our promises. And so one of the things that I think about is, I mean, we talked about generations before us, but what do we leave the next generation? And that a lot of that comes with generational wealth. And as you know, and I appreciate you all working with us this past session and supporting the effort to get rid of predatory lending in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But there's more to it than that. When you think about individuals and generations of races that have had to deal with systematic racism, it leads to some individuals owning houses, some individuals owning business, some individuals in significant debt, in redlining, and all that plays a part in it. But one of the things that we are really starting to explore now is taking it a step further from bad debt to actually how do we make sure that individuals of color are receiving an opportunity to receive good debt. And so mortgages are very important in making sure that there's an equal playing field and banks are being good actors as it relates to that. And so as the senator and the delegate mentioned, there are so many. I mean, we could go down a number of roads, but that's why, as you just mentioned, it's hard to follow these members. But it's a good thing because we all have our passions, but all of us are right there together. You may have Senator McClellan working on prison pre-K to prison pipeline. You may have Delegate Bourne working on housing, or they may be working on it together. Senator Mamie Locke and I are working on Juneteenth, and we worked on predatory lending together. Don Scott and Carroll Ford are working on criminal justice reform and have been really leading the way in the crim sub in courts. I'm really proud that we have so many individuals in leadership in the General Assembly, in the House and the Senate, from the Senate Pro Tem to the majority leader in the House, and chairs of pretty powerful committees, including Luke Torian, Chair of Appropriations. And so I'm happy to follow our members because I know that at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot to celebrate collectively. And again, any one of us would be more than willing to have conversations, whether that's virtually over the phone or continue to join you in Zooms like this, which I think are so meaningful to connect with individuals so that they know some of the issues that we're fighting for. A lot of times individuals approach me at the barbershop. I know it doesn't look like I go to the barbershop, but they approach me and they have good ideas and they have things that I didn't think about because it's real life experiences. And I think that's what you heard Senator McClellan and Delegate Carroll Ford mention, is those real life experiences that we show up in Richmond year after year to try to address those. But again, we need to make sure that we're hearing from the people and seeing the people. And you asked me what you can do. We got to figure out a way. And I appreciate the protests and individuals showing up in the streets across the Commonwealth and across this nation and across this world, matter of fact. And I'm not going to even put a but behind that. And we need them to show up and talk to those legislators that aren't supporting these initiatives. Because there's a reason. This is the season to get these things passed, but there's a reason why they didn't get passed before. And I don't want to get political, but just as Senator Harris said yesterday, We don't need to just win. We need a mandate. And it's the same thing here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We need a mandate. We need to show all leaders across the Commonwealth, whether it's a Republican in the Senate or a Democrat in the House. We need to show each and every leader across the Commonwealth that there's a mandate to deliver and finally address these issues. So that's what individuals can do. We appreciate you taking time to talk and listen to us, but we want you to make sure that you encourage other members of the General Assembly as well.
Yeah, and certainly at the Virginia Interfaith Center, we'll attempt to do our part as best as we're able with our members from across the Commonwealth. I want to thank you, Chairman Bagby. I want to thank the esteemed guests, Delegate Carroll, Hoyne, and Senator McClellan as well. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedules. I know this month of this year has been chaotic, but we appreciate you all giving us a little bit of your time. So thank you very much for joining. Thanks to everybody that's out there watching, and we look forward to helping and doing our part next week and in the weeks and the months and the years to come. So thanks very much. And as you see, you can go to our website to hear more ways to engage and contact your legislators. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this.